Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lauren Stewart. I'm the naturalist at Maumee Bay State Park, and today we have some very lovely guests joining us, and we are talking about owls. We get to see a whole bunch of interesting things, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speakers. But before I do that, I just want to bring your attention to the Q&A box. You're probably going to have some questions. The owls are awesome, and it's always fun to learn more about them. So if you do have questions, please check out that Q&A box, and we'll ask our naturalist. So I'm going to introduce our naturalists at Hueston Woods State Park, Catherine and Sean Connor, and they're going to tell us more about owls. And here they are.
Hi everyone, like Lauren said, I am Catherine Connor. I have been a naturalist here at Hueston Woods for about 5 years.
I am Sean Connor. I've been here at Hueston Woods at the Nature Center for about 15 years now.
So we definitely know a little bit about owls and would love to share with you today. To start off with, we're going to talk about Ohio as an owl area. So for us here, we have about 8 different species of owls. Now that's not all year round, but we have as a collective whole about 8 species. Every now and then a oddball might fly in here and there, but those 8 species are really the ones we're going to cover today. Before I get started, I do want to talk a little bit about Hueston Woods State Park. So if you've never been to Hueston Woods State Park, we are located here in Southwest Ohio, very close to Oxford, Ohio, Miami University, kind of right on the Indiana-Ohio border as well. Our facility is a little bit different than some other state parks you might visit. So we've got a nature center, which is full of reptiles and fish that are also non-releasable. But what makes us a little bit unique is our birds of prey exhibit that you'll see outside. So around back, our visitors will be able to see a variety of non-releasable birds of prey. So we're talking eagles, hawks, owls, vultures, falcons, and all of those for some reason or another have been deemed non-releasable. Here at Hueston Woods, we do operate a raptor rehab center. So those birds of prey come to us first. We try to get them healthy enough to be sent back out into the wild. But for those that cannot be sent back, we either find permanent homes for them within the state or throughout the country for people who have proper permits and things. But that means we get ourselves a lot of birds as well. So you'll definitely have to come check us out. We use those birds for things like this. We take them to schools, community events, senior citizen facilities. We take them everywhere, and we just try to educate our viewers and the public about our beautiful birds of prey that we have here. So let's talk about raptors or birds of prey. People often hear that but don't exactly know what that means. So a bird of prey is a type of bird that uses its feet to get its food. So birds of prey or raptors have some common characteristics throughout the species, and those are going to be, first off, amazing eyesight. Now, they've got great eyesight. That doesn't always mean they're going to use that great eyesight to find their food, but all birds of prey have exceptional sight. The other things that they have, like I just mentioned, are those talons. Talons are used for gripping, grabbing their food. They're often very strong and used for different means. Sometimes it's for grabbing that food and carrying it to a different location. If you think of falcons, they actually use their feet to stun their food when they're flying and then capture it. So those talons are very important and unique for a bird of prey. The other thing that they all have is a nice, sharp, curved beak. Now that sharp curved beak is used for lots of grabbing and pulling and ripping. Once you've got that food, you've got to get it apart. A lot of times birds of prey will eat their food whole, and if it's too large, they'll take it in bite-sized pieces. So I mentioned their food, and we're talking about owls. Everybody's going to ask about owl pellets. So owl pellets are these little things here that folks are most familiar with dissecting in school. You can break it apart and maybe see some bones or feathers, scales of what an animal might have been eating. I am here to start off by telling you this actually isn't an owl pellet. This is from a hawk. All birds of prey expel a pellet, and pellets are formed because of the way that they eat their food. So I mentioned that they eat everything. And the way that works, they eat that fur, they eat that bone, scale, everything. Their body acts a lot like a blender. So it all goes into a crop first, and a crop then circulates the food. It circulates it around, breaking it down, and all the good, nutritious things that their body can take goes down into their stomach. What keeps churning around, though, is the stuff that they can't break down, like the fur, like the bones. And so eventually, usually takes about a day or so, usually 8 hours after a meal has been taken in, that it kind of starts forming and pushing together. And then usually about once a day, you'll see a bird shake its head, look there for a second, and then bloop, out comes a pellet. And like I said, you can break apart that pellet, see what that animal's been eating. I actually know what we feed our birds, so pellets are not always super exciting for me. Like here we have got a little piece of chicken bone. We've got all sorts of fur, got some rock in there. But pellets are not just something that an owl does. Any bird of prey will expel a pellet for us. But let's talk about owl-specific traits then. So if pellets aren't, what are owl-specific traits? And those are going to be a handful of things. So remember I said owls have really great vision. That's not actually how they find their food, though. Most owls locate their food by using their ears or their sense of hearing. And owls' ears are so much to help them be able to hear. So first things first, their ears are not side by side like our ears. Their ears are actually offset. One ear is going to be found kind of down a little bit lower, closer to their beak, and the other one is found a little bit closer up towards their eye and top of their head. So not only are they offset, what that offsetness does is lets them register a sound a little bit faster. But not only are they offset, they are huge. Owls' ear cavities are ginormous. You can actually see it in the picture there when you actually move all the feathers and see their actual ear. That just helps bring and amplify sound for them so they can register it faster. The other thing that has to do with their hearing is their feathers. Owls' feathers all over their body have a purpose. So let's talk about facial discs first. So those are going to be the feathers that you see around and near those ears. Those are the feathers. Facial discs are the circular feathers around their eyes. People often think that's what makes owls look like they have a face. But what those feathers actually are used for is sound hits them and they get pushed back to the ears. So facial discs are feathers that are used for their sense of hearing. The feathers that you see in the second picture is a really close-up picture because owl feathers, their flight feathers, are a little bit different than other birds. And that is because on the very end of their flight feathers, they have kind of like a fringe or a comb. And what that combed or fringeness does is when they flap their wings, air will pass through that and the fringe catches the air and breaks up any sound that an owl would make when it's flying. And so that's why owls are known as silent flyers. And they use that ability to sneak up on their food. Owls are actually not very fast flyers, so being able to, see, hear their food and know where it is, that helps them. And those specialized feathers to keep them quiet also help because they only can reach speeds of about 30 miles per hour. When you think of in the bird world, hawks reaching about 90 miles an hour, peregrine falcons all the way up in the 200s. Owls are kind of the slow bird, but that is okay. They've got some other things to really help them catch and get their food. And the next thing I want to talk about is their talons. So a lot of times people will think of birds as having 3 front toes and 1 back toe. Gotta have my pinky stay down there. So 3 up front, 1 in the back. Owls have this really wonderful ability to move this outside talon. It can stay up front for grabbing, or it can actually move back and they can have 2 talons in the back and 2 talons in the front. Often we call it the X. They have an X talon because you've got almost like a little box of talons. And what that does is a couple things. So one, that allows them to grip a larger radius. So instead of pinpointing one location, they can kind of grab an area. A lot of our owls are going to be hunting at night, and even though they have these specialized senses, sometimes it's still hard to capture a food as small as a mouse. So having that larger range is perfect. The other thing that's really neat about their talons is whether it's forward or backward, owls can lock those talons in place. And so once they've grabbed their food, their body is locked in place. What that locking does is kind of take some stress and tension off of their muscles. So if they do have to fly a distance, they're not exerting too much going down towards their talons. It's more being used in flight. So those talons are really important. And you've heard me mention it already. Remember, birds of prey have excellent eyesight, and owls are no exception. They have got ginormous eyes. And I have a picture of their skull here because sometimes people don't believe me. Their eyes take up the majority of space in their skull. And it would be very similar to if we had softballs just plastered on our faces. They are huge. And the reason their eyes are so large is it allows their eyes to process small snippets of light a little bit faster than, you know, those smaller eyes. So if they are in a dark setting or at night, obviously, they can actually capture that light and see during the dark, which is pretty interesting. The unfortunate thing about those really big eyes is they don't actually have any muscles around their eyes big enough to move them. So an owl's eyes are actually always looking forward. We call it binocular vision, and that just means that their eyes cannot move. We can move ours from side to side. They just can't do that. They are looking straight forward. The advantage of that is that it does allow them to see an object with both eyes simultaneously. And so they, again, just like with their hearing, it allows them to register that image faster and then head out towards it. Some downsides to really big eyes. So not only are there no muscles to move them, you got to compensate for that then if you want to look around. And so everybody thinks an owl can turn their head all the way around. Hopefully you guys realize that's not true. They can turn their head fantastic, though. They can do it about 270. So if they were looking straight, they would be able to turn, and look about to that back corner, but they wouldn't be able to see back up front. They would have to go back the other way and then go this way. The way that they can do that is the vertebra in their neck. They have double the amount of vertebra in their neck than we do. We have 7, so that means they have 14 bones in their neck to help them turn almost all the way around. So even though they have those big eyes, and some people might see it as a little bit of a con, their body has made up for that. Now we do want to talk about each species individually of owls that we have here in Ohio. And we want to start off with big. So I want to introduce Sean and one of our residents, and that is going to be our great horned owl.
Hi. So this is one of our resident great horned owls. Her name is Icarus. You may have heard her chatting in the background. She can be a somewhat vocal bird. Great horned owls, like Icarus, are a very common bird that we see. You can hear her call quite well there. You can, we see these guys throughout Ohio. Mostly they like to live in maybe kind of the edges of forests. You'll see them in kind of open areas. They live in very similar areas that we might see things like red-tailed hawks or other big birds like that. That's because they eat a lot of different types of food. Certainly she would eat a lot of mice, squirrels, rabbits. She might eat small snakes. And then one of her favorite foods is actually skunks, which I know doesn't sound too appealing to most people, but she's a big fan of them. And that's because even though she does have that excellent eyesight that Catherine was telling you about, and that excellent hearing, she actually has a very poor sense of smell. So she can't smell those skunks very well. And because of that, great horned owls are really about the only natural predators that skunks have around here. In fact, we quite often will get a great horned owl into our rehab program that still smells really bad from their last meal. Now, I said she is a great horned owl, and she gets that name, and I will try to show you this without getting bit, but from these feathers that stick up on the top of her head. But somebody long ago saw those and thought those looked like horns, so they named her a great horned owl. Those certainly aren't horns. A lot of people think those are her ears, but they're not ears either. Like Catherine mentioned, her ears are actually down on the side of her head, kind of behind her eyes, and they're a little offset. Those feathers, really, their main purpose is to help her with camouflage. When she's sitting up in a tree trying to hide, she might stick those feathers up. And then when we look up there, instead of seeing a big round head that sticks out in nature, you'll see a little bit more jagged shape. And that just helps her blend in a little bit, helps her hide. She's got very, very good camouflage. In fact, the only thing that might give her away are those big yellow eyes. And then right now, you might see that white patch under her throat. What she's doing there, and she's going to stop it as soon as I start talking about it, is, but as that white patch moves in and out, she'll do that to pant. Great horned owls can't really sweat like we do. So if they start to get a little bit hot or get a little bit nervous, and she might be nervous, she's been hasn't got to do a lot of programs here lately, they'll pant just like a dog does. Icarus here has been at Hueston Woods for several years now. I think she's been here for about 8 years. And she's actually kind of a rare story for us. Most of our birds came in because they have some type of physical injury. But for Icarus, she came in when she was just a baby. She was actually only about 2 weeks old. Unfortunately, a storm blew her out of her nest. We knew where the nest was, so we figured the best thing to do would be to try to put her back into the nest. Unfortunately, anytime we tried, her mother attacked us. These guys are very, very tough birds, so we don't really want to tangle with them too much. So we weren't able to get her back into the regular nest. We decided to try to build a fake nest. So we took a basket and lined it with grasses and sticks, and we put her into it, hung it up as high in the tree as we could get it, and it kind of worked. Her mother was coming down and feeding her, but then we noticed that she still had a couple siblings up in the real nest. And there's just no way that her mother could have taken care of 2 nests at one time. So we ended up bringing Icarus back here to our Raptor Center. Unfortunately, she got a little bit too used to it. By the time she got big enough that she could fly, she had become what we call imprinted, which basically means that she doesn't know she's an owl, and she doesn't know how to be an owl, and certainly wouldn't be able to take care of herself in the wild. So now she stays with us and gets to go to a lot of schools and community events and do things like this, and does a pretty good job for it, but can be very, very vocal for sure. And now she'll bite my glove as well. So you can hear that call. I would say great horned owls, they often kind of sound like what you think an owl call is. They've got those kind of long hoots. And this is a real common one that we might see. So this is a good example of one that you might even find in your backyard. Let's let Catherine come back in.
And I am going to talk about an owl that you are not going to get to see too often, and that is going to be our snowy owl. Now, snowy owls are going to be a species that are typically found up in the Arctic tundra area. Now, the Arctic tundra is going to be vast whites and grays, and to blend in with that and use the camouflage, that is exactly the colors that you're going to see a snowy owl. So what they will do is they will typically kind of migrate down here in the wintertime when food is a little bit scarce up there in the Arctic. So they will come down here in winter to basically get a break, find some more food, and to do that, what they're going to do is trying to find typical habitat that would maybe mimic the tundra. So we think of big open spaces. A lot of times snowy owls are spotted at airports. They are spotted in those big, nice grassy strips that they have. They are also spotted a lot of times in fields, so farmers' fields. In fact, so I've seen 3 snowy owls in my life. The 2 were up at the Richmond airport, not too far from the park. And then this past year, we were very fortunate. Sean, on his way from leaving the park, spotted up at the top of a telephone pole just like spotted here, this was actually the owl, just like shown here, was driving and went, what was that? That was definitely not one of our regular birds. So he turned around, looked up, and there was a beautiful female snowy owl. And they tend to stick out a little bit because of that white coloration and because of the way that they hunt. So up in the Arctic, their main food source is going to be a very small rodent called lemmings. It's typical size to a mouse that we think of, maybe a little bit bigger. But here, they kind of switch their diet a little bit, and they're going to go after waterfowl, some seagulls and things like that, or gulls, excuse me, and things like that. And so not only are they found in fields, airports, but sometimes they can be seen along Lake Erie. I know Lauren up at Maumee Bay gets a good look at snowy owls, hopefully every year. They are getting more and more common to come down into this area, and they're spotted a little bit more than they used to be. It's still very rare to get to see them. I know when we spotted ours, the next day, the whole road lining both sides of the street were lined with cars trying to get an eye at this beautiful bird. So the reason they were able to get such good looks at this bird is because of the way they hunt. So snowy owls will hunt using what they call the perch and pounce method. Pretty effective, I would think. So for them, they don't often fly and search for food. Sometimes if they're out and they see it, great. But what they usually do is they'll sit high up, sit low to the ground, either way, and they'll just listen. They will listen and look for food. And as soon as they, something piques their interest, then they'll go out for food. They're not going to be really flying and searching for their food. And that is fairly unique. There are a lot of species like hawks that will go and actually search for food. And so that technique is a little special for them. These are the species of owl technically that are the largest that you would see here in Ohio. They are slightly larger than a great horned owl. Thinking their weight will be anywhere from 4 to 6 pounds. They've got a really long wingspan of about 4 feet. But that's all very similar to a great horned owl. Snowy owls are just slightly taller. They do not have ear tufts like Icarus did, and they do have those beautiful bright yellow eyes. But as Sean mentioned, great horned owls have that hoot, and that's what people think of a traditional owl sounding like. I'm here to tell you all owls sound very different. So let's take a quick listen to what we think a snowy owl sounds like. So it's a lot of very loud peeps, kind of almost scream-like, not necessarily like some of the other owls we'll be talking about, but they are very loud, more scream-like, not necessarily the beautiful hoot that you think of as an owl having. There is another owl that we have here in Ohio that is quite an interesting caller, and that is going to be our barred owl.
Hi, so this is one of our barred owls here at Hueston Woods. And I'm going to say that again because sometimes people mishear that. It's not a barn owl. It's not the ones that we think of living in barns and other buildings. It is called a barred owl, and it gets that name from the stripes or bars that go across his chest and his wings and tail. Now, I will tell you, good thing to know about this one before we go too far is he hates me. So that means a couple things. As we're talking about him, he tends to keep his eye on me a lot. And two is that whenever I'm around, he puffs out all his feathers. So this bird is actually a little bit misleading right now. He's not as big as he looks. In fact, I'll try to show you this as well. If I stick a finger into these feathers, I can go all the way almost to my knuckles there before I actually hit anything. So he's just kind of all puffed out trying to make himself look nice and big. Barred owls are another very common bird. This is one that, again, you might not see a lot of because they are still mostly nocturnal, but barred owls will actually come out a little bit more than some other species during the day. So early in the morning, maybe as you're driving to work, you might still see some of these birds around, or if you're driving around in the evening, they might come out a little sooner than some other owls as well. They tend to like more wooded areas. They especially like more mature forests, older forests. Those forests tend to have kind of nice big trees, but also have some open space, which makes it nice and easy for them to fly around and find their food. And just like the other owls that we talked about, they're going to eat a lot of small animals, a lot of mice, lizards, snakes, songbirds, and things like that. But like most of these owls, they're actually not too picky. Now he has some features that the other owls had as well, as they get hit with a wing. He has those big circles around his eyes. Those are those facial discs that Catherine was telling you about. And he definitely is going to use those quite a bit. This is one that, well, you might not see that much. You might hear these birds quite a bit. Barred owls have a very distinct call, and I will try to do a very poor rendition for you. But a lot of people think that when a barred owl is calling, it sounds like they're saying something. They think it sounds like they're saying, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" So if you bear with me, I'll do a very bad impression of it, but it is, oh, 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 oh. He doesn't care. But let's maybe play the real call and see if it sounds a little bit better than my example. Oh, maybe. All right. Well, this one in particular, his name is Clyde. And Clyde's another bird that's been with us for a long time. And he actually came to us from the Trotwood Police Department here in Ohio. The officer said that he actually pulled a car over because it looked like there were clothes coming out of the guy's luggage on the top of his car. So he stopped the car, went to talk to the driver and explained that he thought that his luggage had popped open. And the guy explained that he didn't have any luggage on the top of the car. So when he shined a light up there, he actually saw Clyde here stuck in the luggage rack. Unfortunately, he'd flown over top of the car and just didn't quite clear it. So he gave us a call. We walked him through the process of how to safely get him out of the luggage rack and bring him to us. But unfortunately, in that process, he broke his wing. So it's not real noticeable, but he did break his right wing and actually healed up pretty well. In fact, I thought he might have been a good candidate to try to release, but unfortunately, our vet just decided that it wasn't good enough to completely let him go. So now he has to stay with us, and I don't think he likes it too much. Mainly, he doesn't like me. He seems to do well with our other staff, but he always keeps an eye on me. But if you make it out here to the park, you can get a good eye on Clyde.
Another species of owl that we have here in Ohio that you are not going to see very often is going to be another Arctic tundra species known as the short-eared owl. So short-eared owls, like I mentioned, are going to be in the same type of area as you think of a snowy owl being, but there's a lot of differences between them. But first things first, something not different is the fact that the reason people get to see these so frequently in Ohio when they migrate down in the wintertime is they are actually what we know as diurnal. So a lot of folks know nocturnal means that animals are awake more at nighttime, but diurnal means that they are going to be awake more at kind of during the day. So snowy owls are definitely diurnal. Short-eared owls are considered diurnal, but they are also a term called crepuscular. And crepuscular is those animals that kind of fall between the two. So they are going to be animals who are mostly active at dawn and dusk. And so a lot of times our short-eared owls kind of between the two of diurnal and crepuscular. So with these guys, their characteristics are going to be kind of the distinguishing feature are their little bitty ear tufts. Their ear tufts are nothing like a great horned owl. They are very small. In fact, most of the time photographers or just folks going out to see the bird don't actually notice them. They do have very large facial discs, which actually make their eyes look tiny, when in fact their eyes are still very ginormous. Their feathers around them are just huge. They're actually very similar in size to barred owls. They're a little bit smaller. They only will weigh about maybe a pound. They are very, very small birds, but it is pretty neat to get to see them fly. Even though they're a small in weight bird, they have big, long wings, and they use those wings kind of funny. They will flap them very slowly, and they will often clap them almost seemingly together. And a lot of people who watch them think that they look almost like a moth at nighttime, when those big moths are flying and kind of doing it slowly, kind of fluttered and not really looking like they have a huge purpose in what they're doing. That's kind of how short-eared owls fly. And so a lot of times people think they look a little funny. And I was lucky enough to see one of these short-eared owls here in the Oxford airport, because remember, Arctic tundra species, they come down here, they're like, what's kind of similar? Short-eared owls are going to be found same spot. Some airports are great, big open fields, perfect spot to get to see yourself a short-eared owl. Now, they do have those bright yellow eyes still, and they've got all the same characteristics, just a little bit of a different species that you're not really going to get to see as often. They're still going to go after small mammals like they would up in the Arctic. Just here, they tend to go more still small mammals, but they also kind of verse out into smaller birds as well. So not really the waterfowl and gull-sized birds, but some of the smaller birds. So why don't we take a listen to what this short-eared owl sounds like? I often call this the meowing bird. There are some species of songbirds that have a similar call, but for an owl, they are about the only one I've heard that lets out a meow, meow. And that's just their beautiful call that they have. If you're lucky enough to get to see one of these guys, it's typically going to be, like I said, in those colder months. So when you're out and about, keep your eyes open into those open fields, because clearly we've got some migrators down here that would be perfect to get to see. It's me again. I completely forgot that I have to talk about next the long-eared owl, which very, very closely related to short-eared owl, but could not be more different. So with these guys, one, not itty-bitty ear tufts, huge long ear tufts. Often these guys get compared to great horned owls, even though they're very much unsimilar behavior as well. But they just have those really long ear tufts. Same thing, they have really large kind of those facial discs. And with these guys, it's beautiful. They are an orangish brown color. Oh, they are a great bird to get to see. But those enlarged discs actually make their eyes again look very, very small. And even though these guys are closely related to short-eared owls, very different behavior, very different location. These guys, not in the Arctic, they're actually going to be found in the boreal forest. So up there, still in cold temperatures up in Canada, but just not quite as far north. So what these guys will typically do is still go after open field areas, but they are a strictly nocturnal bird. It is very hard to get to see them during the day flying. It's kind of neat because it gives you a little bit better chance of seeing them during the day because they stay in one location. They're kind of resting at that time, and they like to tuck themselves and hide themselves during the day. And a lot of pine trees, cedar trees are perfect for them. They like to get themselves kind of like this picture shows all the way in by the trunk of the tree. And that way their camouflage can really help them out and break up what they look like. And sorry about that, kind of break up what they sound like, what they look like, break them up with all the twigs and the peeling bark that often those pine trees and cedar trees will have, or just that mottled bark in general. So it is a really great camouflage technique that our long-eared owls have. And with these guys, what's neat is sometimes, and it doesn't happen too often in Ohio, but you can see more than one in the same tree. They are the only roosting species, communal roosting species that we have. And what that means is it just means when they go to rest during the day, they will rest together, kind of all in one. So you can see 20 plus owls in one tree. I have not seen one. This is actually the last of our 8 species here in Ohio that I still need to see. I was really close this past Christmas, but unfortunately, I think somebody had scared it away before I got to the location. So I am still on the lookout. So next winter, here I am looking for long-eared owls again. But with them, that nocturnal kind of habitat that they have, or habit that they have, excuse me, means that you're not going to get to see them flying, but they are still going to go after very small rodents, small songbirds sometimes, but really those rodents are what they kind of push their food towards. Like meadow voles are perfect for long-eared and short-eared owls. What is neat about these guys is there has been some studies done where they actually had complete darkness. So everything was turned off, no light was being emitted into the room, and a long-eared owl could still catch a mouse. And so that means that their hearing is so specialized that they can use that along with that X grip and all the other things to help them catch something when they can't even see it at all. These are amazing birds. They do have a pretty interesting call that I'd like to play for you guys. It's going to sound different. So I kind of explain that one is it kind of sounds like a who, but it also sounds like a boo, kind of like a boo, ghosts. Yeah, I just come up with all sorts of silly things to try to remember my owl calls, and I'm getting better and better at voicing them. So let's talk about another species that we have here that you can see any time of the year.
All right, so this is the most common owl in Ohio. This is an eastern screech owl. This one's name is Stewart. But screech owls, like I said, are the most common owl in Ohio by far. We just don't see them that much. Like most other owls, they are nocturnal, so you're not really going to find them out during the day. And these guys are kind of the masters of camouflage. So they've got some really good patterns on their chest and their wings that help them blend in. And kind of like the great horned owl and like some of the other owls, they have these tufts up on the top of their head that help them blend in as well. So really they just kind of disappear into a tree and look like a piece of bark up on the side of the tree. Again, the only thing that would give them away are those big yellow eyes. So they actually spend most of their day squinting. Well, they will close those eyes, but they can barely see out of them. We can't see them at all, but then they can still see us. And these guys will live in a lot of different types of environments. So we'll see these guys certainly in wooded areas, but they also like to be in areas that are a little bit more open, still have some trees, so those places to hide, but plenty of room to fly around. They also love to live in places near water, and that's because a lot of their food lives in water. Screech owls are not picky on their diet at all. In fact, they probably have more variety in their diet than just about any other predator in the world. They've been known to go after about 150 different species of small animals, and then probably another 150 or a couple hundred species of various insects. So we'll eat some large insects like moths and grasshoppers. Maybe later this year they'll get some of those cicadas that'll be coming out. They'll definitely go after mice and songbirds. But like I said, they don't mind water, so they'll dive down into a shallow stream looking for things like little fish and frogs and crayfish and salamanders. I think when you're this small, you can't turn your nose up at a meal too often. So they'll eat just about whatever they can catch. Stewart's another one that we've had for a few years now. I think he's been with us for about 5 years. And he was another one that came to us because of a wing injury. So you can see that right wing sticks out a little bit. The story with him is that actually the people that brought him to us said they found him in a factory in Middletown, Ohio. Said he was just in a stack of wooden pallets. You can really see how well that head turns around there. See how far he won't do it all the way, but he gets pretty close to that 270 degrees. They found him in a stack of wooden pallets. Brought him to us. Unfortunately, while he was in there, that wing did get broken. So you can see how it sticks out. Again, it healed up enough that he can fly some. He can fly pretty well across his cage, which his cage, he's got a couple different cages, so he can make it about 6, 7, 8 feet pretty easily. And he can actually go a little farther than that even. Just not quite well enough for him to be able to survive in the wild and catch that food and make it very well on his own. So now he has to stay with us, and I think all in all has a pretty pampered life. One of the things that is unique with screech owls, at least as far as owls in the state of Ohio, is that they come in a couple different colors. So this is also an eastern screech owl. The only difference is this one, everywhere that Stuart had a gray feather, this one has a red feather. Her name is Stella, and she is exactly like Stuart in every other way except for color. They're going to have the same diet. They are exactly the same species, but they do have those two different morphs. We generally see the red morph a little bit more in northern Ohio and the gray morph more in southern Ohio, but both morphs can be found throughout the state. Stella is one that didn't come to us from our rehab facility. She actually came to us from another rehab facility called Black Swamp Raptor Center. Unfortunately, they had to close down a few years ago, and they asked if we would take some of their educational birds, and she's one that we were happy to take. Unfortunately, with her, the story that they said is that she had flown into the side of a building, and she had damaged her eye, so that left eye is completely blind now, and she also had some wing damage as well. So can't fly very well. Can fly a little bit, just wouldn't do well out on her own in the wild. And screech owls are another one that has a very interesting call, but again, doesn't really sound like a hoot like you would think it would. Oops, she's going to come after you guys there. In fact, a lot of people think that the call of a screech owl, and they actually have a lot of different calls, but their most common one, people think actually kind of sounds like a horse. We'll see if you guys can hear that. And I cannot do a very good example of that, so I do not even try that one. I will play actually a second call for her, though, because there's another call that I think I hear even more than the horse whinny, and that is this one. So if you guys are out at night, keep a close eye or keep close ear, I guess. Listen to what's going on. And while you might not see these guys that much, you should, or you might be able to hear them quite well. And this is an owl that, and actually are as many of the owls in Ohio are, that if you go outside at night in the area where they live and you make that call, they might respond to you. And that area, like I said, could be a lot of different places. These guys might even live in your own backyard. Let's have Catherine come back on and talk about another species.
So, guys, I love screech owls. They are definitely a crowd pleaser. How can you not love an owl that tiny? Well, I'm here to tell you that there's an owl even tinier, and that is the Saw-Whet Owl. So Saw-Whet owls are another species that will only come down here really in the winter time, and they are a species that are going to be found a lot like the long-eared owl in the kind of boreal forest. So that upper area in Canada that is forested, open spaces, and when they fly down here, oh, they're so little. They're a few inches shorter than screech owls. They only weigh about 3 ounces. Can you imagine 3 ounces? That is our little owl. Screech owls will weigh about 6 ounces usually. So Saw-Whet owls, even tinier. Boreal forest, though, they come down here in search of more food. They're going to be still eating very small rodents. Sometimes they'll go after songbirds, but for these guys, really the small rodents like our mice, our voles, nothing really larger than maybe, I wouldn't even say a chipmunk. They're tiny, they need to keep that tiny food. With these guys, though, when you get to see them, it's pretty unique. They are, again, just like the long-eared owl, almost strictly nocturnal. So you won't really get to see them out flying at night, unless, I mean, you might see them flying at night if you get a good look, but most of the time people see them during the day. And when they see them during the day, they are too hiding. They're using that camouflage to blend in with our trees. They will also go after that kind of broken up bark, pines, cedars. The other area of these guys, and this is where I have gotten to see them, is in honeysuckle. So they're going to be in like thickets of large, very like muddled up spaces. So that area really is perfect for saw-whet owls. Now I mentioned that they are small, they've got those beautiful yellow eyes, they have no ear tufts, but something pretty interesting about these guys is if you do get to see them, I've seen them a few different times, through owl banding. We are very lucky to partner with Dr. David Russell from Miami University, and he does owl banding and other songbird banding within the park. And what you will notice is after they're done doing all their measurements and things, they'll take a look at their feathers, and they're looking for growth. Newer feathers on saw-whet owls under a black light will actually glow pink. So it is pretty neat to get to see an owl glow. And we were very fortunate. The very first bird in our rehab of 2021 was a saw-whet owl. That was a first time for Sean Orai's career. It was neat because our officer, shown here with his son and Dr. David Russell, we let them release it for us. But he had called me and said, "Hey, I think it's just a screech owl. I'll put it in rehab." And I came in, and to my surprise, it was a saw-whet owl. Number one, I went, "Man, buddy, you gotta come with me to do some bird ID because this is an exciting find." Saw-whet owls are kind of unique and really just don't get to see them that often. So to get one into our rehab, it was fortunate to have just kind of been clipped by a car. It didn't break any bones. It just had a little bit of damage to its muscles. It got strong and it was ready to be back into the wild. If you do get to hear a saw-whet owl, which with bird banding, you hear them all the time. They just keep playing the call. It sounds a lot like. I definitely call that their sonar. It's the beep, 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 beep. And to end this, let's take a look at this little guy getting released. You stuck with us through 7 different owls. Let's finish it up here with number 8.
All right, guys. So our final owl that we have here today is by far our kind of least well-behaved owl. But this is a barn owl. And there he tries to fly away. Barn owls are a pretty rare bird in Ohio. In fact, up until just recently, they were considered a state endangered species. And what that means is that while they actually are pretty common in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, here in Ohio, we just didn't see a lot of them. And we still don't, but their numbers are doing a little bit better now. And that's because here in Ohio, we just don't really have good habitat for them. Barn owls' kind of favorite habitat or natural habitat is going to be open fields or open meadows. And our farmland here in Ohio just doesn't mimic that very well for them. But in other parts of the country, and like I said, even other parts of the world, these guys can be very, very common. And as the name suggests, these are ones that love to live in barns or other old buildings. And it's not that they're flying around looking for a barn. But what a lot of old buildings have, especially old barns, is they have holes in them. They're old, and so that makes it nice and easy for these guys to get in and out of those holes, and so they can raise their young in that barn. Now, what you'll see with this one especially is that barn owls have a much different color pattern than a lot of the other owls that we talked about today. And that's because they are living in that slightly different environment. We're not going to see these guys out in the woods. We are going to see them in open meadows. So they have a lot of spots on their chest there, but otherwise kind of that nice white chest, and then that kind of goldish tan color on the rest of their body. And that helps them blend in with their environment, the environment that they're going to be in. The biggest identifying feature of these barn owls is that face. Those facial discs on a barn owl are so large that it takes up the whole front part of their head, and it gives them that heart-shaped appearance to their face. Or some people say they look like a monkey or even a ghost. And in fact, that leads to kind of one of the myths that I think barn owls might be behind. Barn owls, again, have a very distinct call. It's not a hooting sound. In fact, let me see if I can play their call for you. So I think, if you imagine, especially maybe a couple hundred years ago, if you walked out into your barn and didn't have electricity at that point, so you probably were just walking out there with maybe a lantern or a candle. So you probably didn't get a real good glimpse of what was living in your barn. You might just see it kind of fly by you, and as Catherine mentioned earlier, they fly completely silently. So it almost seemed like it was floating. Maybe you get a glimpse of that white face, and then you hear that call that sounds like a scream. I think a lot of people may have thought that their barn was haunted, or in fact, it was just a barn owl. But they love living around farms. Again, their favorite food is going to be things that live in those meadows. Their favorite food is what's called a meadow vole, but they'll still eat mice. They'll still eat some small snakes and small lizards, but they mostly like those small rodents, especially voles. This one's name is Bo, and Bo here is another kind of special case for us. And then he did not come to our rehab at all. Bo was actually born in captivity. He was born at a facility up in the New England area that was raising barn owls to be used for education, specifically to take them to places like ours, or other maybe zoos or things like that would use them for educational purposes. And so after that, he started his career at a facility down in Kentucky. They had him for about 2 years. During that time, they tried to take him to schools and various other events. But after 2 years, they decided they did not want him anymore because they said he is a jerk. They said that, as you may have noticed already, he doesn't do a very good job of sitting on a glove. They said that he was kind of aggressive with them, that he would actually try to attack some of them. So they decided to get rid of him. And we heard about him and said that we would absolutely take him. I actually kind of like birds that have a little bit of an attitude sometimes. Now, I haven't seen the aggressiveness that they mentioned, but I definitely see where he doesn't like sitting on a glove. When I go to get him out of his cage, he just flies all around the cage and makes it really, really hard for me to catch. Sometimes when I get him out of his cage and no one else is around, he screams in my face. So I think it is true that Bo is a jerk. But all in all, I think he's a great bird for us to be able to see. And I think he has a long career ahead of him in show business. So let's bring Catherine back in here.
And we really want to thank you for your time here today with us. There is a couple things we want to leave you with, and that is some stuff for you guys to get to do at home. So you've hopefully enjoyed our presentation today, but why don't you dive a little bit further? So one of the first things I want to offer you guys, and I have been graciously given permission by my dear friend at Waukena Nature Preserve. She is their graphic artist as well as naturalist, and she has created a whole series about owls of Ohio. So they have created, she has created coloring pages of each species, and you can go print, download, and color and learn even more. The other thing that I would like to offer to you is another thing you can find online or at facilities like ours is these wonderful field guides that the Division of Wildlife have put out. Boom, I have one too. They are very small easy to put in your bag, and they're just quick little books that go through each species, some of the area that you might find them, and a lot of the information we discussed today. And so they also come paired with a owl disc that you can learn all of your different owl calls on. And some of the other things you can do at home is some of these activities. Use binoculars, use paper towel tubes, and try to create and mimic that binocular vision that owls have. There is Bo right there. Creating that owl vision. The other thing is simple. Crumple up a piece of paper, close your eyes, and see if you can just point at that piece of paper. Try to see if you can get it. You probably can on the first try. And that's why owls have that big long grip. Then try with both open hands, closed eyes, to grab that paper. I think it'll be a little bit easier. The other thing is going to be dissect a pellet. You know, you can purchase owl pellets. I know a lot of schools do. It's pretty fun to get to break down and see what is inside. We really do want to thank you today. We are going to get to your questions, but there is one last thing we always want to remind visitors of, is sometimes you do run into injured and orphaned wildlife, and that is not something that you should try to take on yourself. In fact, it's illegal, but good intentions. Try to get yourself to a licensed, permitted rehabber, whether that's for raptors, like we have our permits through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Division of Wildlife, or there's facilities that take in small mammals, waterfowl. The Division of Wildlife's website is a perfect resource for you guys to use to be able to get the help that you need. And if you have a hard time accessing the internet or finding it, just call 1-800-WILDLIFE and they will be happy to assist you with absolutely anything you need. And we appreciate your time. And if you've got any questions, we would love to help answer them.
We do have some questions, Catherine and Sean, I'm sorry. Kaden and Layla want to know, are vultures birds of prey?
That is a great question.
So, Bo appreciates the question. Not really. So vultures, while they have a lot of the same characteristics of birds of prey, they have curved beak, they have curved talons, they kind of have a lot of similarities to a hawk. They're actually not very closely related to hawks or owls. They're actually more closely related to things like herons and cranes and large bird, aquatic birds like that. And they don't go after live food for the most part. Some vultures will occasionally, but the turkey vultures that we predominantly see in Ohio, that are native to this state, they only go after things that are already dead. They're already dead. So we sometimes group them as birds of prey, but they are not a raptor.
Excellent. The S family wants to know, do the talons keep growing and could they possibly get too long?
Oh, that is an excellent question and a big reason and part of our job. So their beak and talons are both made out of keratin, which is the same thing as you think of as your fingernail. And so they keep growing. And a lot of times birds of prey in the wild will rub up on sticks, rocks, the bones from that food, and kind of trim it down naturally themselves. In captivity, sometimes the birds stop doing that natural behavior, and then that means we have to do it. It's a process called coping, and all we do is use a small Dremel tool to trim and sharpen back those talons and their beak. It's not a fun process for them. It's not a fun process for us, but it is something that's quick and something we have to do for their safety and general health.
Excellent. Sue wants to know, how much weight can a great horned owl lift?
Ooh, that is a good one.
So in general, with raptors, they can lift about 2/3 of their own body weight as a max. So that sounds like a lot, but even that great horned owl that we had out here only weighs maybe between 3.5 to 4 pounds at most. So really the most that big great horned owl could carry off is maybe about 2.5 pounds, maybe 3 pounds if it, has had a good lift that day. Nice wind, facing into the wind, perhaps.
I know a lot of folks are worried about their small dogs and cats and things outside, and just because they can't be carried away doesn't mean birds might not still try to fight with them and tussle a little bit. So it's always a good thing to keep in mind to keep your eyes on your small pets and things if you go outside.
Great, and a couple more questions. Do the
We love
ears?
questions.
I know, you have a few. Do the ears hear things around the owl, and how many babies can an owl have at once?
Okay, do you want to take one and I'll take the other?
Sure. You want to go with the ears?
I will. So their ears, though look a little different than ours, work pretty much the same way. They're going to pick up sounds around them, all around the owl, and they just get amplified. They get louder and they get registered faster than mammals like us can actually process. Something really fun to do is our ears are actually offset as well. So if you go home, look in the mirror, one ear is actually slightly lower than the other, and that's our body's way of trying to help our sense of hearing as well. I know folks with glasses know this very well. Glasses get fitted to your face, not the other way around. And their nesting habits.
Yeah, so owls are odd, and the owls actually won't build nests. So that's kind of the first thing. When you see an owl nest, know that that owl actually stole that nest. These guys won't build a nest themselves. They'll usually either take a nest that maybe a red-tailed hawk or another hawk isn't using at the time, or maybe they just steal it from them, or they just find a hollow cavity in a tree, or anything else that might, or a barn, or something like that that might be suitable. So they won't build a nest. The exact number of young that they'll have each year varies a little bit by species, but typically with all the owls, they'll only lay eggs once a year. So great horned owls are one of our earliest ones. They can actually start laying eggs in late January or early February. And right about now, you might see some hatchlings up in nests. The larger birds will usually have a few, smaller number of babies. So for a great horned owl, it might only have 2 or 3 owlets at a time. For a smaller bird like a screech owl, it might have up to even 4 or 5. But even that would be about it.
And that is a good time for me to thank Randy Tucker for allowing us to use that wonderful photography that he has shared with Hueston Woods State Park. And in fact, if you go and check out his website, he actually has pictures of great horned owlets at the moment. So they are definitely starting to be visible.
Great, and just a few more questions. I want to thank you so much for your time, and it sounds like Bo is being very patient there in the background. We do, yes, Bo. We do have a few questions about how long owls can live, and Sue wanted to know about the eyelashes. The feathers, or are they kind of like eyelashes that we have?
I apologize, Lauren. I will definitely hit on how long owls can live. What was that second question that Sue wanted to know?
About the lovely eyelashes that Clyde has. Are they specialized feathers, or are they eyelashes like ours?
So perfect. So I will cover real quick those. See, he never talks during the presentation, but as soon as we're done, he wants to chat it up. Okay, so how long can owls live? So that is a wonderful question that all birds of prey kind of vary in. And the one thing they don't vary in is the fact that when they come into captivity, they typically have a longer life. So a bird like Bo or Clyde can live in the wild not that long. It's pretty lucky if they make it to maybe 3 to 5 years old. Something that we didn't mention is it is an owl-eat-owl world out there. Though owls don't have a ton of natural predators, they do have predation within their own species. So usually any owl larger will prey upon smaller species. So a great horned owl could eat a barred owl or a barn owl, or, well, really any that I listed that we covered. So their lifespan in the wild is very short. In captivity, though, we have had great horned owls live into their 30s before. And we've had screech owls live into their very late teens, early 20s, which for a screech owl it's a miracle to make it to 2. So we're very fortunate to have the birds that we do, even though they've gone through traumatic events, but it is, you know, a little bit of an easier life for them now. And here is Sean and a much quieter owl to talk about the eyelashes.
So yeah, the eyelashes, their eyes are kind of specialized in a few ways. The eyelashes are basically, you know, like feathers, or specialized feathers, but they work the same way that eyelashes do for us, and it helps protect those eyes. So it's going to help keep dust and dirt out of those eyes. The other thing that helps with that, and it's really hard to see, but sometimes when they blink, if you're paying close attention, you'll see that owls actually have an extra eyelid. So they have the top and bottom one like we do, but they also have one that kind of goes side to side. It's a clear eyelid. It's called a nictitating membrane. And with those big eyes, that nictitating membrane helps keep those big eyes nice and moist. It helps, again, keep some dirt out of there. It helps protect the eyes when they're eating. So they can close that nictitating membrane, still see a little bit through it, but don't have to worry as much about injuring those eyes because they are so important for an owl's survival.
And one last question, we are running out of time. Do owls eat bees?
Okay, that is a wonderful question to end on as we are getting our pollinators out and about with these beautiful flowers we've been having. There are some insects that owls will eat, especially, actually, screech owls are one of the ones that will go after the most insects, but they're going to be sticking more towards something a little bit bigger and juicy. So we're thinking those really large moths, we're thinking very large spiders, and things that are coming out when they're awake. So even though these guys are nocturnal, they might be hunting during the day, but a lot of the times what's awake at nighttime is on the menu for him.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially Sean and Catherine with all of the lovely birds they brought today. I wanted to remind everyone that we do have another webinar coming up next Wednesday at 10 our normal time. It's on spring ephemerals, our lovely spring flowers that are just here briefly. And we did have a lot of questions about finding the resources for the owl booklet. It is available on the Division of Wildlife's website. They actually do have a whole slew of different books and guides for native Ohio wildlife, not just owls. There's even trees, lichens, there's raptors, there's our songbirds. There's a ton of really, really good information on the Division of Wildlife website, and it's under the Backyard Wildlife Guides. So I wanted to thank everybody so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful week and hope to get to see you next Wednesday with our spring ephemerals. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.